Okay, we're live. My name is Philip Martin, and I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery with Portia Hine. Usually it takes a few minutes for people to start to come into the conversation here, so we'll just let people flow in. I can see we got a few people here coming in the chat today, which is great. Really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm glad that people could join us today. Okay, so again, my name is Philip Martin. I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery with my wife, Portia Hine, who I hope you have had a chance to meet either at the fair or in the gallery. And this is a conversation that I'm extremely excited about with Daniel Dove, who will be doing a show with us in the fall. And I just want to thank everybody for coming in. And I hope you've had a chance to join us for some of our past conversations. We talked yesterday with Brian Bress, which was really great. That's now posted in the video section of our website. And today we're going to talk with Daniel Dove. So Daniel and I have known each other for a long time. I think I've finally openly acknowledged actively in these chats, or found myself talking about the fact that I got an MFA in painting. So in looking at Daniel, you're looking at someone who, we're looking at the work of someone who I have known now embarrassingly for 25 years, and who has really shaped not only my professional life, but also my personal life in so many ways, and taught me so much about painting. So how are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks a lot, Philip, and thanks for doing the series. I think it's really great to hear these conversations.
Well, it's been really exciting, and I think that's, again, one of the things that I've most enjoyed about this time is sort of how the art community has really, in a lot of ways, come together and engaged with issues like police violence and COVID and some of those kinds of things. And I think that it's also been a really interesting moment for us to learn more about the artists that we're interested in come into your studio. So I can see some paintings that you're working on in the back, and we'll get to that. I'm here in the east side of LA. Daniel also lives and works here in LA. So I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. Looks like you're working on a few different paintings there at the same time.
Yeah, I try, if I can, to get several going at once, because I feel like it's sort of like there's this Darwinistic condition for the paintings, where the one that's the most interesting is just going to keep drawing your attention, and the one that's the least interesting might not ever make it to your source of nourishment. And so it's almost like it's a survival of the fittest between ideas. Because if you're only making one painting at a time, which works for some people, but if you're only making one painting at a time, in my case, you're always working on the best painting you've got going, and the worst painting you got going. So, it helps to sort of sort. It's a sorting mechanism, I think.
Well, this first image is actually kind of interesting. I had put up as kind of the introductory image, but it's actually two very different paintings.
Yes, that's true. And they were made only maybe a year or two apart from each other. But I think that one of the reasons why, I may have a little more diversity within a body of work from work to work than some other artists. And it's just that I have multiple threads kind of being worked at the same time. So I have, it's interest in mid-century modern furniture and sort of what that sort of signifies in culture, but I also have an interest in these kind of public sculptures. I have an interest in urban decay. I have an interest in modernist abstraction, and having these sort of multiple fascinations, which I've always had, yields, instead of yielding completely different threads or bodies of work, now it yields some heterogeneity within the body of work. But I think of them as all sort of coming from the same core set of interests.
So tell me about a painting like this. What are we kind of looking at? What do you see us seeing in this picture, and how do they come together?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I end up having to ask people what they see a lot in my paintings, in the sense of, like, in the most basic sense, what do you think you're looking at? I will get people in front of them because I'm moving through it with this like full knowledge of what I intend. and I
Mhm.
understand that the delta between my intention and what other people see grows as the painting develops, because I'm just sure that people know they're looking at some, a kind of like variation on a Henry Moore and a Dubuffet and a Calder sculpture that are all kind of sitting in a public square around this building that's suffered some kind of grievous damage. And then that somehow ends up being combined with a series of shapes that hit the picture plane and stop existing in the spatial illusion of the landscape. Like all this is running in my head. It's like, obviously that's what's happening. And then I'll get somebody in front of the painting, and some people like will read through it in that way, and other people will just stand there and sort of not be able to really, they'll be able to say, like, pick out one object, like, well, I know that's a thing, I know that other thing is really far away, and so and in a way, I guess that the slow unveiling of the actual subject matter is one of the things I'm interested in. That a painting could have so much that is connected to observed reality, but then actually still be somewhat confounding to one's orientation in
Well, I've
relationship.
been looking at this painting for a long time and actually will admit that while someone else may have seen it first, I've actually really only starting to see this and these parallels as well as this kind of decaying building now as I've been looking at it, as we've been talking about it. You made an interesting comment there about the picture plane versus kind of depicted painterly space. Do you want to talk a little bit more about those two parallels in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that
The picture
there,
plane being kind of the surface of the painting as a window, and then the whole Renaissance idea of painting as window.
right. There are these formative experiences that artists often have when they're young, where they first they see a thing and they just feel like this undeniable sense that this is a great thing. And maybe it's only later where you sort of like parse that out and understand why you might have felt that way. But when you're very young and maybe you first see, in my case, something like a Rembrandt painting, and you'd think like, yeah, well, this is what painting should be. And then you maybe a few years later have a not dissimilar experience in front of an early Frank Stella black stripe painting,
Mm,
and that's confusing,
I
right?
see.
And so on one hand, there's this incredible kind of building up of form, flesh in the case of Rembrandt, which is exposed to flesh under a certain kind of raking light that really utilizes the physical properties of painting as a medium to capture the very specific sense of tactility of the flesh. And on the other hand, in the Frank Stella, you have something that like has vacated every possible sense of like illusionistic depth,
Mm.
um, and sits entire, just its objecthood asserts itself in this way that I never understood in reproduction until I saw one in person. It's like, man, that is a thing, and its
Yeah.
thingness is so. And so this duality of a painting being both a window into the world and a physical object has been interesting. A thing that has a physical surface that you can actually just look at the physical surface at, and as a aggregate of material. It's been interesting to me since very early on, but recently it's become even more interesting to me because of the prevalence of screen imagery and how
Right.
the physicality of painting is an alternative to the ubiquity of the dematerialized imagery in screens.
Right. So obviously a few different things there. One, I just want to comment on that the point that you made that you have this kind of Greenbergian question of modernism, as one of the well-known critics of modernism, Greenberg, pointed out, where there's this insistence on the flatness of the picture plane that's a break from a certain other kind of traditional painting and sort of leads you in this direction that goes from towards someone like Stella from someone like Monet. Also then, of course, that you and I are both people who are of a generation it's post Richter, So Gerhard Richter obviously articulating this conversation between painting and photography as two different representing systems. And then for our generation, there was obviously a very well-known, or at least for us, impactful piece that Lane Relier did that was a cover for Art Forum that I always remember, that was kind of around 96, that talked a lot about, rather than painting and photography, painting and computer practice. And so the flatness of screens, the bits and bytes of computer practice, and those as a parallel for the bits and bytes of painting. So some of these images that we're looking at, I just pulled them out because they're obviously, they're oil studies and beautiful small paintings. And they're not pieces I had seen before. And obviously if people have any questions about these works, you can obviously just write me and let me know. But, you know, you're from Austin, Texas, and some of these paintings were done in Cleveland. It seemed like being in Cleveland in the early 2000s, in terms of seeing this industrial city and this change in the modern American landscape, was really impactful on you.
Yes, it was. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons why maybe Austin wasn't is partially because it's really normal to naturalize the place you grow in which you grow up. It's sort of like the place in which you grow up is sort of like, that's how places look. It's like water to the
You're
fish.
from Austin, Texas, yeah.
Austin, Texas, yeah. And also because Austin has been kind of a perpetual boom town ever since I was a young adult. And so its transformations were always sort of in line with, you know, capitalist expansion and opportunity. And then you move to a place like Cleveland, which is in the opposite direction. You know, it's sort of height of its power, its population, its you know, economic prosperity was at some previous time, some previous era of our economy. And so looking at a city that is not being, in a way, not being tended to, in which it's lost, you know, a lot of the shepherds of the city have left, is to live in a place and look at the place in which there can be either a lot of just the effects of entropy, you know, sort of unguided back towards order, and also the effects of kind of like just ad hoc sort of improvisation on a small scale. So things in Cleveland felt like they were coming from the bottom up, particularly in the neighborhood that I lived, which was in downtown Cleveland. And it did get me interested in this whole idea of a building that's sort of half sheared off, which you know, its face is removed, and then you can see the interior of the building, which appears a lot in my paintings.
And then how does a modernist object like this, fit into a landscape like that? Obviously, yeah.
Well, you know, because of the past, if we're talking specifically about Cleveland again, and that's only one of my motivations, but you know, there's a past of real prosperity there, in which maybe corporations could invest in something like a work of art as, you know, its contribution back to society, or some kind of display of its success. And then it's fallen on hard times, and maybe the sculpture itself has also fallen on hard times too. And so those forces of entropy that are, you know, making a really massive impact on the building, and the fact that half its front face is sheared off and you can see it into it's half demolished, is also starting to creep up onto the sculpture. So in this case, it's like up to about the level of 6 feet. It's just scrawled with graffiti. But once you get above 6 feet tall on the sculpture, then the graffiti just drops off. So it's kind of, you know, it's getting reclaimed or reoriented by people who are now, let's say, ad hoc practitioners who aren't being sort of policed and you know, aren't sort of being regulated in the same way. Yeah. So what happens in a city that is in decay.
Do you see these paintings differently through the light of current events, like with regard to, say, police violence, or the feeling of where American structures are right now?
Well, I think I don't think I connect them specifically to the topics of the recent protests, because I feel like those claims are so vivid, and they're so pressing, that I sort of, I don't know to what extent they can ever, they can be generalized beyond, how they stand as political claims. And I certainly feel wary of generalizing them into some kind of aesthetic um, proposition.
Mm.
Um, but I do think that, there's something about anxiety, about the loss of order, or maybe it's the state of the world after order has broken down, that has been really interesting to me since I lived in Cleveland. And I think that maybe that's one of the things that a lot of people, one of the thoughts a lot of people are mulling over at this moment. What does a world look like um, after it's been sort of just altered by unprecedented events?
Did you grow up in a house with a lot of art?
Not at all. No. I mean, there wasn't a single work of art in my house, and we never went to a gallery or museum. My parents, they just don't have any particular care for the visual arts. But I do remember somehow there was a book that made its way, a very kind of general kind of art history, not even a textbook really, just kind of like a coffee table book that somehow found its way, probably through, Goodwill, found its way into the bookcase of my parents' house. And I remember as a child looking at paintings by Henri Rousseau and being just terrified by them, particularly that painting of the jungle with all the little eyeballs of the animals. It haunted me. So I have that memory. So there was some exposure to art. Oh, and also Paul Klee, the twittering machine, it just scared me to death. But I had to keep looking at it. So that was my early exposure to art. Minimal but memorable.
And so you obviously went to the University of Texas for undergrad, and then you worked with Peter Saul, or people like Peter Saul, but then also worked with people like Mel Bachner and Sylvia Mangold at Yale. Do you think those people had any influence on yourself as an artist or as a painter?
I mean, I think it's undeniable, even though to account for that influence, it's almost like it's almost like the way the influence is experienced is that I will think something to myself as being true, and it seems self-evidently true. And then I remember that actually there was a time before I knew it. And then I think, well, how did this get uploaded? And then I remember, well, no, that's something that Peter Saul said,
Right.
or it's something that Mel Bachner said.
Right.
I mean, there's really no overlap between somebody like Mel Bachner and me in terms of like maybe our aesthetic interests, but he was a magnificently good critic,
Yeah.
and could talk about any kind of work, and I felt like it was sort of my first model of how somebody who really loves music, they have their favorite old country star, they have their favorite hip hop star, they have their favorite Baroque fugue, and Wagner was that kind of person. He was not ideologically narrow. He was the opposite of that.
So I think one of the things that's interesting about your experience is that, at the University of Texas, having also gone there myself, it's an incredibly school when, for technical painting. Like, you really learn how to do observed painting, and you really understand painterly how to mix color and oil when you go through that program. And for people who are looking at something like this, the subtleties in the colors, if you just look at green, for example, or gray as it transitions to green and blue and brown in different directions, there's so much variation and subtlety, and those are doing very different things to put everything in space in this piece. And so we're going to look at sort of how you still operate as an observed painter. Obviously, photography and computer-driven architectural programs help you define spaces, but yet you still have to figure out how not to invent your color. So, and at the same time, then there's also the question of how observed painting works as a method in terms of making a great art object, because a great painting is not always a great art object, and great paintings can sometimes be more like almost a craft, the way that it exists almost in a craft sense, that it's very sort of specific to the medium itself, but maybe not to the conversation about art. It's a very kind of long-winded ramble. Maybe you can help me put some precision on my question.
No, I think actually it's it's pretty precise in what it defines. I mean, there's, and actually I think of it as being a somewhat hard lesson that I've learned myself. There was those early experiences in which the just staring at a thing that's really visually complex, and almost anything is, if you stare at it long enough,
Right.
Is just staring at it and having this feeling that no matter what I do in terms of painting it, I'm always going to be making some kind of reductive interpretation, because it's going to always have more information than I'm going to be able to capture as an artist.
And these are all paintings in progress. So we're going to take a little look at, say, these are drawings for work. So, sorry, I didn't mean, I totally interrupted you, but go ahead. Sorry.
No,
I'll just move through these studio shots, and if you want to say anything about them, just let me know.
Yeah, and so anyway, that because it's a mesmerizing process to paint from observation, but at the same time, because of them being mesmerizing, you can lose track of whether or not you're in dialogue with other things in the art world, or whether you're adding anything to the history of ideas. So it's got to be more than just a process or a behavior.
Right.
And so there was a time when I broke from really strict observational painting, which defined a lot of my student days, and started to invent worlds, invent objects, and so almost all of my subject matter at this point is I don't want to say imaginary in the fullest extent. Like, it oftentimes has its basis in something. Like, this is the atrium and the menil. This is sort of where this painting, an image like this begins.
Right.
It's right. It's an atrium that's right behind the African art collection.
Now that you say that, it's funny because I can see obviously in the upper left that fluted.
Yes. Yeah.
I've not placed this, but now that you say that, obviously it's very clear.
Yeah, and so that there's this kind of moment of connection with a place or a set of visual conditions that then I want to take and then reinvent for my own purposes. But I still am compelled by this feeling of observed light. I mean, that's something that I think remains just totally compelling to me. And so, if you aren't in a situation where you can actually be in front of the thing because the thing doesn't exist, then you kind of have to create stand-in for the thing. And here's a shot in my studio in which I have this box and I have these colored LED bulbs where I'm lighting little models that I've made in order to get color information. So I can take the color information that I'm looking at from observation and then apply it to structures that I've been, influenced by photography or computer-generated imagery, or that I've made up.
So, again, we've probably just got about 5 minutes here. So I don't know if there's if people have thoughts or anything that you can put a question in the chat and we'll take a look at that. But yeah, no, it's interesting because here you are working on something that is invented, that you have invented or brought together from various things, and yet working from your real immediate experience to build that painting.
Yeah, it's something I want these things that they feel like they have this kind of authority of reality to them, but at the same time, they aren't direct records of anything that ever existed. So the feeling of it being real, and the possibility of, to whatever extent I can, replicating that kind of initial experience I had. Oh yes, the faceted globe. This is 3D printed.
Oh really?
Yeah, it's 3D printed a model, and then it just, you put colored light bulbs on this thing, and your head explodes, not because of the color that, at the outer edges, which you would expect from a blue light and a red light, but from the colors in between. It's that
Right.
band of sort of gray violet
Yep.
that I feel like I could never predict
Yeah.
would exist in the transition.
Well, this is the thing is that, when you have that experience of mixing oil paint, like it literally takes years to figure out how to do some of what to kind of get the difference between that and that. I just So here's an example of how then you can pull out and create just a beguiling. There's a surreal quality to it. There's a well, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's based on a Picasso painting, but I've turned the
Right.
painting into a sculpture of this weeping figure, and then put it in front of this like large kind of like satellite dome. I mean, this kind of antenna dome that's decaying at the bottom, and the globe, the faceted sphere that you just saw, is used as the color source for the object behind the sculpture, in which all of those like gray, yellow colors are colors that I never could have like just figured out on my own. And so I wanted this feeling of just ambient, hot yellow light, um, and uh, and then also this secondary light source coming from the front that is a sort of a blue light, and that it's just such a complex color condition that I had to actually set it up in my little model stand. A question just came in over chat as to whether or not I paint in natural light. Actually, I used to live on the central coast of California, and somehow never stayed at the Madonna Inn, but I lived there, and I had a period of time in the afternoon when sunlight would come into my studio, and so a lot of my paintings that look like they're lit by sunlight are actually lit by sunlight, because I would set up little models on a stand where the sunlight would hit, and then I would paint from natural light. So I love it, but that, of course, that's contingent upon where you're able to actually set up and paint.
Well, given your fear of Rousseau, I mean, this now it really starts to remind one of Magritte, because you mentioned the Picasso painting, or there's the sense of the skull in it. I mean, are we headed maybe a little bit more in terms of those kinds of greater images within the context of the work?
Um, it's funny that I just had a comment from a friend of mine, about one of the paintings behind me, that was said, in which this person said like, "Oh my gosh, that's more Magritte than I've ever seen your paintings be." And
Yeah.
I've actually never even thought of Magritte as being one of my guiding lights, but I suppose that there's something about, I mean, his interest in really weird paradoxical light experiences. Um,
Well, I think the thing about Magritte that's interesting, that you and I have talked about before, is just that Magritte's a sign painter. That's his background. And when you're a sign painter, your goal is to have the person looking at your object understand immediately what it is. And then the mystery in, say, a Magritte, for example, works from immediately comprehending it and then having it kind of that comprehension unravel before your eyes. And so here, for example, there's different moments that you might fasten on. One might fasten on the surface decoration, so to speak, of some of these blue areas, or one might fasten on some of these chairs. But then it all starts to become odd, and what are we looking at, either as a painting or as a depicted space?
I hope that that's the case. That blue appears both as the lit side of a chair, and also as a shape that just sits right on top of the surface of the canvas. I
Hmm.
want there to be a productive kind of mystery. I want there to be like a moment in which apprehension or recognition is really slowed down.
Hmm.
Because I think that that's just very valuable, to have this feeling that you're not quite sure what you're looking at or how you're oriented in relation to the subject matter. And maybe my hope is that gives people an incentive to really like look, as opposed to feel like they recognize. There's another question. Have you entertained the idea of these painted imaginary worlds of high culture apocalypse as a kind of comment on its fragility and sort of monstrosity? Now, that's a great question. I mean, and here's an image where, you know, you have a collection of fetishized mid-century objects that would never sit out in front of an abandoned building for more than 12 seconds if anybody from the creative class was around, because they didn't instantly be snatched up and taken home and worshipped. Yeah, I mean, there is something about the way that I paint the world after its most optimistic moment. That is, you know, like it's, you know, like people make these grand gestures when they are most optimistic about the direction of their culture or their own lives. And then there's some moment afterward, which is maybe much more melancholic, where we recognize that we're past the peak. And I'm not making a larger statement about the nature of the world necessarily, but for whatever reason, there is something about that post high optimism moment that I'm very drawn to on an emotional sense.
Well, it's interesting because this painting also kind of, I don't know why, but making me think of someone like Paul Cadmus, where you have this kind of intense energy and feeling to the energy that's going on. But then, as you point out, it's again like that Magritte, where you have the immediate impact of the image followed by reflection, and, you know, it starts to come apart. Well, there's a lot more that we could be talking about. I really enjoyed this conversation, Daniel, and maybe we should plan a part 2. Is there anything else that you want to say before we sign off here?
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to say is that you've only got to be a few more interviews away from being the Terry Gross of visual artists. You know, I mean, Terry Gross is such an amazing interviewer, but she actually almost never seemed to interview visual artists. I feel like, yeah, at some point you're going to receive that crown, and you should wear it with pride.
Well, I can't say that I would ever be Terry Gross. I mean, it is amazing to have learned so much through her, but I think that as a gallerist, what I can say as a failed artist is that it's pretty amazing to have this opportunity to, I don't know, be there and watch people solve problems they can't solve. And I think that's one of the real pleasures of being in art, is being able to see these things. Yeah, to see people solve problems that you never thought of, have no idea how to solve, and don't know if they'll solve them either, actually.
Yeah, I think there's no guarantee at any point. Yeah, so that's what makes it thrilling and anxiety producing, and never to be abandoned, never to be.
Well,
no
Cezanne died still looking for his sensation, so, you know, hey. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it. We're really happy that you could come and be here, and we hope that everyone is well and healthy. And just like as I say, we've had some great conversations. They're on the video section of our website. We also now have a studio section. There's a really nice interview with Daniel there where he talks a little bit more. And again, if you have any questions about the works, of course, you know, let me know. Feel free to be in touch. And Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Philip.
All right, take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.